I'm Brett Baer, live at the White House tonight. A short time ago, North Korea launched another intercontinental ballistic missile, this one with greater range than any fired by the Communist North to date, escalating tension with Washington and its allies in the region, of course. It breaks a 10-week pause in Kim Jong-un's missile testing. Late this afternoon, President Trump did not say much, but was insistent.
A missile was launched a little while ago from North Korea. I will only tell you that we will take care of it.
The UN Security Council has called for an emergency meeting tomorrow afternoon. The North Korea escalation comes on a big day for the president's tax reform push. We have Fox team coverage on both big breaking stories. John Roberts here at the White House to tell us where we are on the tax package right now. But we start off with national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin, live at the Pentagon. North Korea's first missile test since September. Good evening, Jennifer.
Good evening, Brett. Missile experts tell us North Korea can now launch a missile over 7,500 miles on a flattened trajectory, putting every city in the United States now in range if the warhead survives re-entry.
It's the third time North Korea has ever fired an intercontinental ballistic missile. The ICBM flew 2,800 miles into space for a total of 50 minutes. That's more than 10 times higher than the orbit of NASA's space station.
It went higher, frankly, than any previous shot they've taken.
It splashed down in the waters off Japan within 280 miles of shore.
Today at 3:18 a.m., a ballistic missile was launched from North Korea's western coast and has landed in our exclusive economic zone.
The launch time unusual. Normally, North Korea launches at dawn or during daylight hours. The latest provocation comes more than a week after President Trump put North Korea back on the state sponsor of terrorism list, and after Trump warned North Korea, "Do not try us," in a speech in South Korea earlier this month. South Korea responded to today's test with a precision strike of its own, firing a short-range missile with a clear message for Pyongyang. This occurred 6 minutes after North Korea's launch. This is the 16th ballistic missile test for North Korea this year. With each test, experts say North Korea is getting closer to perfecting the re-entry of a potential nuclear warhead into the Earth's atmosphere, capable of one day striking the United States.
It's likely that the envoy from China, who just visited recently, was trying to negotiate with them, that has not succeeded.
Earlier today, the South Korean unification minister warned that North Korea's nuclear program is advancing more quickly than many thought. Quote, "We cannot rule out the possibility Pyongyang may declare the completion of their nuclear program in a year."
Tonight, U.S. diplomats have called for an emergency UN Security Council meeting to debate a possible naval blockade to interdict cargo ships going to and from North Korea. Brett?
We'll have a National Security Council official here in just moments. Jennifer Griffin, live at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. President Trump says Americans are going to get the largest tax cut in the country's history. That burst of optimism came after the president met with Senate Republicans to try to secure the needed votes for tax reform. And it came on a day that included a heated back and forth and a meeting that never happened with Democrat leadership. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts tells us where we stand right now. Busy day.
Good evening, Brett. Good to see you. A senior White House source told Fox News that they are taking this tax reform one day at a time, and they really don't know where it's going to go. But today, the president did have some reason to celebrate. After getting snookered by Senate Republicans twice on Obamacare, President Trump came a step closer to the goal line on tax reform today when the Budget Committee voted to send the bill to the full Senate.
We had a unanimous vote on the tax bill, and it goes now the next step, and I think we're going to get it passed.
The vote came after President Trump led a lunchtime pep rally with Republican senators.
We had a phenomenal meeting with the Republican senators. I wish you could have been inside that room. It was very, very special. The camaraderie. It was somewhat of a love fest. They want to see it happen.
But sources say the president was quite frank with Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, who had threatened to hold the bill up in committee, telling him to vote yes and work out any differences he had with his colleagues.
What the president told me is we need this this thing passed through committee, and we're going to fix your issue. When the President of the United States tells you he's going to fix your problem, and he asks for your vote, I was more than willing to give it to him in conference here today.
Now the bill goes to the full Senate for consideration, with President Trump acknowledging there will be, quote, lots of good adjustments to the bill. Senator Johnson and Steve Daines of Montana want a more generous tax cut for small business, bringing it closer to the proposed corporate tax rate of 20%. Senators Corker, Flake, and Langford are concerned about tax reform blowing a huge hole in the deficit. They want a trigger to increase taxes if economic growth doesn't offset the cost of tax cuts. On Fox this morning, Corker said he would not let his feud with the president influence his vote.
Look, I would never vote against something because of some disagreement I have with an individual, nor would I vote for something solely because I like someone.
Whatever form it takes, if a plan is approved by the Senate, it will go to the conference committee to be reconciled with the House plan. Predictions are the committee will give deference to the Senate plan to ensure passage. The final bill would then go back to the House and Senate for approval and, if passed, go to the president's desk. As President Trump met with the Republican leadership and members of his team, there were two conspicuously empty seats. Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi bailed out of the meeting after the president tweeted this morning, quote, I don't see a deal with the Democrats on the budget.
I'm not really that surprised. We have a lot of differences. They're weak on crime. They're weak on illegal immigration. They want the illegal folks to come pouring into our border, and a lot of problems are being caused. They want tax increases, and we want major tax decreases. So they decided not to show up. They've been all talk, and they've been no action.
But President Trump predicted Schumer and Pelosi will soon come to the table because of the latest missile test from North Korea.
I think that will have a huge effect on Schumer and Pelosi. I think. We'll see. We're going to learn very soon. They should be calling immediately and say, we want to see you. We want our military funded, and we want it funded now. It's going to be bigger, better, stronger, it already is, than ever before. But we want to get going on that now.
President Trump suggested that the latest North Korean missile test has completely changed the dynamic of the budget debate. Now that Kim Jong-un has got an intercontinental ballistic missile that can reach any city in North America, particularly the United States, that Republicans and Democrats working together has now become an urgent matter of national security, Brett.
You know, on that December 8th government shutdown, usually it is always the Democrats who manage to get Republicans on the blame game. It seems like President Trump is preparing for the other way.
He's laying the groundwork, but the Democrats are pretty good at assigning blame, so we'll see where that goes.
All right, John, thank you. There is a verdict tonight in the trial of the man accused of planning and executing the attack on the U.S. Embassy in Benghazi, Libya, and also the CIA operation there in 2012. That left, as you remember, 4 Americans dead, including the U.S. ambassador. And after a long trial here in Washington, the results may actually surprise you. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is here with the breaking news. Good evening, Catherine.
Thank you, Brett. 3 years ago, the Obama administration described Abu Khatallah as a central player in the 2012 Benghazi terrorist attack. But late today, after a week of deliberations, a federal jury here in Washington disagreed. The Benghazi suspect was found guilty of supporting and participating in the 2012 attack at the State Department Benghazi compound and nearby CIA post. Khatallah was also convicted on weapons charges and the destruction of U.S. government property. But the 46-year-old was found not guilty on the most serious crime, the murder of 4 Americans: State Department Foreign Service Officer Sean Smith, U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens, and former Navy SEALs Ty Woods and Glenn Doherty, who died defending State Department and CIA officers. The defense argued Khatallah was a peripheral player and that he arrived at the State Department compound after the attack, a claim that seemed to be backed up by security camera video evidence. The defense also highlighted the government's reliance on a paid informant who received a $7 million reward for tracking down the suspect and providing testimony against him. Reached late today, the mother of Sean Smith said, "I am not surprised. I am not happy. My son died horribly. I studied it over and over and lost all the way around. My son and my grandkids. I think the people who bear responsibility, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, aren't even touched. In a message to the CIA Workforce, Director Mike Pompeo called the verdict a small measure of justice for the terror he inflicted upon the patriotic men and women stationed in Benghazi, adding no term in prison will bring our people back. Khatallah will be sentenced at a later date, and he is not eligible for the death penalty. It's also not clear how the verdict today will impact the prosecution of a second Benghazi suspect who was recently brought to Washington, D.C. for trial. Brett.
Catherine, thank you. More on this
You're
with
welcome.
the panel. We said U.S. Embassy at the beginning. It's obviously a State Department location, as we've reported many times, in Benghazi, as well as the CIA. Thanks. The man accused of driving a rented truck down a crowded bike lane in New York on Halloween, killing 8 people, is pleading not guilty. Sayfullo Saipov was arraigned today in federal court. The day after the attack, President Trump said that suspect should get the death penalty. Now back to our top story, that North Korean launch of the ICBM. With me here now, Senior National Security Council official Michael Anton. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Obviously, a surprise. There had been this pause. There was a hope, I think, that perhaps China was having some success there, sending an envoy to North Korea. Is that now dashed?
I wouldn't say that at all. If you look at the history of North Korea in 2017, I don't have a count at my fingertips, but they've launched more than a dozen missiles this year. They've been consistent in their provocations. They pause sometimes. They launch fairly frequently. There's no question that not just the Chinese actions, but American actions, South Korean actions, international actions, a part of a coalition that President Trump has really led to put together, have had their effect on North Korea. And it's harming its banking system. It's curtailing its imports, it's limiting its access to hard currency, and it's limiting its already very limited ability to export any commodities or products that any other country wants.
So today, this was President Trump. He was pressed a couple of times. He didn't say much about the North Korean situation, but here's one thing he was asked.
Does it change anything about your basic approach to dealing with it? Nothing changed. Nothing changed. We have a very serious approach, and nothing changed. We take it very seriously.
Nothing changed. So if it continues, and again, today's ICBM actually traveled the farthest out of any of the tests so far, something has to change. The highest, which would translate to traveling the farthest. Something has to change, doesn't it?
Well, we'll see how this maximum pressure campaign works. As I said, it's taking an effect. I mean, we try to analyze as best we can the economic situation inside of North Korea, and the U.S. government believes it's had a very serious effect on, as I say, curtailing the North Korean economy and really putting a strain on the regime. Nobody thought this would be easy or quick, however, and I think this campaign still has, at a minimum, months to play out. And as it does, we may see further pressure on the regime.
But the time is ticking. I mean, the message is there is a time in which this comes to an end, and some other action happens.
I think the president and his senior national security cabinet have made that very clear, that yes, time is running out. We don't have a lot of time. That's why it's urgent that all nations who want to see this nuclear and ballistic missile threat addressed need to put that diplomatic and economic pressure on now.
The biggest question is South Korea and how they are aligned with the U.S. There had been some pushback from South Korea and the president there, Moon, about having missile batteries, the THAAD system, in their territory. But they are facing an artillery threat immediately if there's any action by the U.S.
That's true. But that artillery threat has been extant for a long time. It's interesting that you bring up the missile. That was an issue. The South Koreans were deploying what's called the THAAD system. They were getting a significant pushback from the Chinese over that system, and that was a dispute that was ultimately resolved in South Korea's favor. China has dropped its objections to the system, which is now going to be installed and deployed. It was going to be installed and deployed anyway, but at this point not over Chinese objections. And so I think that was progress. And also, you just saw the president in South Korea earlier this month, gave an extraordinary speech, had a state visit, showed the strength of the U.S.-South Korean alliance in addition to the U.S.-Japanese alliance. He was in Japan shortly before being in South Korea. It showed actually how well aligned the two countries are in facing this threat.
I interviewed Prime Minister Abe and asked him about this situation. Take a listen. Is there anything short of military action that you think can be done to force North Korea to denuclearize?
What we are doing now is the international community has applied pressure to North Korea so that North Korea will have to change its policy. And we would like to create a situation whereby North Korea itself would come to us and say that they will change their policy and that they would like to engage in a dialogue.
Is there anything, I mean, the UN Security Council is meeting tomorrow. North Korea is already the most sanctioned country in the world. Is anything the UN Security Council can do that somehow ratchets it up further than the U.S. and the UN have already done?
Well, we did pass 2 resolutions already this year. We're always looking at new ways to apply this pressure, whether that be through the Security Council, whether it be obviously unilaterally by the United States alone, and in multilateral combinations. We know that there are other countries closer to the border of North Korea that have much more leverage than the United States does. I mean, we don't have diplomatic relations. We don't really have economic ties. Obviously, we want all the nations of the world to do more. Ultimately, that means Russia and China at the utmost, which have the greatest amount of economic ties and leverage over North Korea. We've seen progress. The president's encouraged by the progress he's seen, especially from the Chinese government over the course of this year. I think we don't believe there's any country on earth that has exhausted all of its alternatives. We think everybody can do more, but we're encouraged by the progress, and we're going to be pushing for more progress.
But today was dangerous.
Anytime they do this, it's dangerous. The program itself is dangerous, and what's especially dangerous is we believe every new test, whether it's successful or whether it's an obvious failure. Remember, several missiles this year blew up on the launch pad. We think that they learn something from every test, whether it's a success, whether it's a failure, or whether it's something in between, and we're constantly concerned and worried about it.
Michael, I know it's a busy day, so thanks for coming out here.
Thank you.
All right. Up next, who's the boss at the government's consumer watchdog? That case goes to court. Less than 90 minutes ago, a federal judge weighed in on the extraordinary tug of war at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, where the Democratic director tried to install his own hand-picked successor, and President Trump named his own acting director. Both were again on the job today, sending out dueling instructives to agency staff. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen is here now with the latest developments out of the Federal District Court. Good evening, James.
Good evening, Brett. District Court Judge Timothy Kelly, placed on the bench by President Trump, ruled against the request for a temporary restraining order that would have blocked the president's acting director from fulfilling his duties. We also learned in court today that Mick Mulvaney, the president's man at CFPB, quote, reprimanded Leandra English, the liberal bureaucrat who claims she is the agency's acting director. President Trump's acting director for the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, Mick Mulvaney, began the morning projecting casual confidence in his leadership of the agency, later blasting out a photo of himself digging into the details as he put it on Twitter, all without mentioning the mounting challenge to his authority.
Hey, hey! Ho, ho! Mick Mulvaney has got to go!
CFPB's Deputy Director Leandra English, installed in that post last week as one of the final acts of ex-director Richard Cordray before his resignation, sued the president and Mulvaney in federal court, seeking an emergency order to bar Mulvaney from exercising authority on the grounds that the 2010 law that established CFPB makes her the acting director. And an attorney for English tweeted out her statement, "I plan on spending the day at CFPB headquarters, taking calls and meetings with external stakeholders and bureau staff."
This agency has fought for working people, and now it is time for us to fight for the agency.
In court papers late Monday, Justice Department attorneys backing the president sought to quash the English suit on the grounds that the 1998 Vacancies Reform Act provides the chief executive with the, quote, exclusive means to fill the CFPB post. Plaintiffs' arguments to the contrary rest on a bureaucratic sleight of hand effected on the final day of former CFPB Director Richard Cordray's tenure, the DOJ argued, and they noted the agreement of the agency's general counsel, Mary McLeod. It is acting director Mulvaney, who is in residence at the CFPB, is listed as acting director on the CFPB website and has begun work. Indeed, on November 25, the CFPB's general counsel advised all bureau personnel to act consistently with the understanding that Director Mulvaney is the acting director of the CFPB.
In my mind, there's no doubt that Mr. Mulvaney is correctly running the agency, and actually the CFPB's current general counsel agreed. So Ms. English is suing on her own behalf.
With English actively emailing subordinate officials, Mulvaney fired off 2 memos to staff, apologizing for the confusion and disruption, but adding, please disregard any email sent by or instructions you receive from Ms. English when she is purporting to act as the acting director.
And Mulvaney has instituted what DOJ lawyers called a soft freeze on hiring and agency actions while this management issue is resolved. The Washington Examiner, meantime, has found in a review of federal campaign finance documents that employees at CFPB, an agency established by President Obama and Elizabeth Warren, have contributed to Democrats over Republicans, Brett, by a ratio of 593 to 1.
James, thank you. Stocks finished at record highs again today. The Dow surged 256. The S&P 500 jumped 26. The Nasdaq gained 34. Republican Kentucky Senator Rand Paul says he is still in pain several weeks after being attacked by a neighbor. Senator Paul gave his first interview since coming back to work to Fox News medical analyst Dr. Mark Siegel today. He says he had not spoken to Rene Boucher in 10 years prior to this attack.
The bottom line is, it isn't so important if someone mugs you, is it really justified for any reason? And so I think the more people belabored, oh, well, was it about yard clipping? Was it because he hates Donald Trump? Does he hates you because you oppose Obamacare? You don't really know what's in someone's mind.
Paul says he has 6 broken ribs. Boucher is out on bail. He has pleaded not guilty to 4th-degree assault. Additional trouble tonight for the longest-serving Democrat in the House. Another former staffer has made sexual harassment allegations against Michigan's John Conyers. The woman says she rejected the congressman's offer to have sex in 1997. She says he touched her inappropriately twice in the 2 years that followed that. Conyers' lawyer says his client denies wrongdoing. Conyers met off campus today, off the Capitol Hill grounds, with Congressional Black Caucus Chair Cedric Richmond and a small group, fewer than 5, of other CBC members, talking about all of these allegations. Longtime Chicago area Democratic Congressman Luis Gutierrez will not run for re-election next year. That move came as a surprise because Gutierrez filed his candidate petitions for Illinois' March primary ballot a day earlier. He says he still plans to fight for immigration reform and advocate for Puerto Rico, where his family is from.
I am going to leave Congress at the end of my term in 2019, but I'm not retiring. I'm not giving up on the fight for equality for immigrants, for Latinos, for women, for fighting for LGBT community, the environment, racial justice, or the whole range of progressive issues I've been fighting for.
Gutierrez is serving his 13th term in the House. Up next, as we told you earlier, the 2 top Democrats in Congress skip out on a meeting with the president, and they talk government shutdown. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox Nebraska in Grand Island, as the Keystone XL pipeline developer and its opponents both asked the State Public Service Commission to clarify last week's decision on a new route. The commission approved an alternate route, but not the one TransCanada requested, the company creating the pipeline. The company wants to know why. Opponents want the panel to reconsider its approval. Fox 25 in Boston, as the parents of a 3-year-old boy say he was left alone on a school bus for several hours. The parents of Javier Ibersold say his school teacher also marked him present when he was not. The boy was eventually found in the bus in a lot 6 miles from the school. Officials say the staff involved have been removed from duty. And this is a live look at New York from our affiliate Fox 5. One of their featured stories tonight, an exhibit of artwork from terror suspects at Guantanamo Bay. It's being held at John Jay College. The Pentagon does not like it. 8 suspected terrorists contributed. 4 have since been released. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back to the White House. Look at the West Wing there, the doors heading towards the Oval Office at the White House. As we told you earlier, there were 2 empty seats at the table for President Trump's meeting with congressional leaders this afternoon here at the White House. Here's Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel to tell us why the Democrats' top lawmakers decided to take a pass.
To run down to the White House for a meeting that I gather Senator Schumer and Leader Pelosi are not coming to.
The government's due to run out of money next Friday, December 8th, and yet Democrat leaders Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi backed out of a scheduled White House meeting with President Trump, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and Speaker Paul Ryan. Schumer said after a tweet from President Trump saying he doesn't see a deal on the end-of-the-year issues, they want to cut him out of the fiscal talks.
As long as he remains a destructive force, it would be a waste of everyone's time to continue working with someone who clearly has no interest in coming to an agreement. We hope the president, in order to avoid this calamity, will change his mind.
The Senate Majority Leader notes he never backed out of a meeting when President Obama was in the White House. And the Senate Republican whip suggested the Democratic leaders want a government shutdown.
I can't imagine why the Democratic leader and Ms. Pelosi decided to simply not do their job. What they need to do is step up and say yes to doing their job and keeping the government up and running.
Democrats have tried to flex their muscles, noting that their votes are typically needed on issues such as spending and debt. They're definitely needed in the Senate, where most major pieces of legislation require 60 votes, and there are only 52 Republicans. And Schumer has rattled off a laundry list of items he wants included in a spending bill, such as cost-sharing reductions for Obamacare, more hurricane relief money, and a debt ceiling increase. Other Democrats have pushed for addressing the status of children brought to this country illegally by their parents.
Oh, you don't have 218 votes to pass a budget, and you need our help? Well, you know that we are ready, willing to keep the government open.
Schumer and Pelosi asked their Republican counterparts McConnell and Ryan for a late afternoon meeting. GOP leadership sources say the meeting was at the White House. They skipped it, so no side meeting. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thanks. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson insists he is not gutting the State Department. Tillerson challenged critics today, saying he's done a lot to bring diplomatic staffing levels up. Correspondent Rich Edson reports tonight from Foggy Bottom.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson claims the State Department is fully staffed, despite months of complaints from Democrats, Republicans, and current and former State Department officials.
There is no hollowing out. These numbers that people are throwing around are just false. They're wrong.
In a memo, the American Foreign Service Association, the Foreign Service Officers Union, says the department has lost 60% of its career ambassadors since January and has substantially fewer senior officials like career ministers and minister counselors.
Diplomacy keeps us safe and allows us to use soldiers only when we need soldiers, and it has not received the priority it should under this administration.
Senator Cardin's office says the Trump administration has failed to nominate for confirmation nearly half, 76 of the available 153 positions. Former ambassadors Nicholas Burns and Ryan Crocker write in the New York Times that, quote, "We are witnessing the most significant departure of diplomatic talent in generations. The drop in morale among those who remain behind is obvious to both of us. We are ringing the village bell in alarm because Mr. Trump's neglect of the State Department will harm our country at an already dangerous time." The State Department says once Congress approves more than 60 promotions, there will be 1,048 senior Foreign Service officers, only 10 fewer than last year.
There is a hiring freeze that I've kept in place because as we redesign the organization, I don't want to have to fire a bunch of people. So I said, let's manage some of our staffing targets with just normal attrition.
Does the Secretary believe that there are some inefficiencies in the building, that with 75,000 people operating here, that there are redundancies? Well, of course he believes that. The Secretary is trying to make cuts where he sees fit.
The State Department says the Secretary will cut to match a smaller budget. The department's target, about an 8% reduction in staff. Officials say they're also preparing to offer $25,000 buyouts to more than 600 employees. Brett?
Rich Edson live at the State Department. Rich, thank you. Vice President Pence says President Trump is actively considering when and how to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Pence made the comment at a New York City event commemorating the 70th anniversary of the United Nations vote that led to the founding of Israel. Last summer, the president backed off a campaign pledge on the embassy move as his Middle East envoy sought to reinvigorate peace talks between Israel and the Palestinians. Up next, reaction from the panel to North Korea's testing of an ICBM today. First, a few other stories beyond our borders tonight. The volcano on the popular resort island of Bali is still erupting tonight. The airport airport has been closed for a second day. Experts say that volcano could stay at its current level of activity for weeks or have an explosive eruption. Pope Francis told Burma's civilian leader today his country's future depends on respecting the rights of all ethnic groups. The Pope did not specifically mention the Rohingya Muslims today, but he lamented how Burma's people continue to suffer from civil conflict and hostilities. Ivanka Trump is talking about the difficulties faced by women during her appearance at a global entrepreneurship summit in India. Officials there are treating the trip by the president's daughter like a royal visit. Her speech was broadcast live by the country's major news channels. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back to the White House.
Two and a half hours ago, North Korea launched an intercontinental ballistic missile. It went higher, frankly, than any previous shot they've taken. It's a research and development effort on their part to continue building ballistic missiles that could threaten everywhere in the world. In response, the South Koreans have fired some pinpoint missiles out into the water. The bottom line is it's a continued effort to build a ballistic missile threat that endangers world peace, regional peace, and certainly the United States.
I will only tell you that we will take care of it. It is a situation that we will handle.
We will handle. The president here at the White House today, the North Koreans firing an intercontinental ballistic missile traveling higher and thereby farther than any other ICBM that they've been testing. It landed about, as you see here in this map, 1,000 kilometers down in the Sea of Japan. This is now the 24th missile launched in 2017, 16 missile tests, and you see the rack up of all of the missile launches and tests over recent years. Today, just moments ago, got word that President Trump spoke to Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan about this launch today. The two leaders, according to the White House, agreeing that North Korea's regime provocative actions are undermining its security, further isolating it from the international community. The leaders, quote, reaffirmed their commitment to combat the North Korean threat. But how are they doing that, and what is next with this? Let's bring in our panel. Joining me here at the White House, Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio. From St. Louis, Matt Schlapp, contributor with The Hill, and from our Washington bureau, Tom Rogan, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner. Tom, first to you. It seems like what has been happening has not been working, and this pause that we saw from North Korea ending today in a big fashion.
And I think that's exactly right. And I think what you do see in specific terms here is the North Koreans showing a capability that far exceeds anything we've seen up until this point. And I think there will be some shock in the White House and the Pentagon and in the intelligence community about just what has happened here. I think for President Trump now, the critical decision is, do you exert pressure on China, specifically Chinese financial entities, or do you take military action? Because what we have seen here with this test is the failure of, or the unwillingness, I think more likely, of the Chinese government to put the kind of pressure on to Kim Jong-un's regime that would be necessary to force him to the table.
You know, I asked Michael Anton about that earlier, and last night, General Jack Keane was talking about this Chinese envoy and the two ways it could go.
If they start testing again, it's likely that the envoy from China, who just visited recently, was trying to negotiate with them, that has not succeeded to the point where North Koreans are willing to start standing down somewhat and maybe get into some kind of negotiation phase as a result of it. But if the testing resumes and the bellicose resumes, we're kind of back where we were.
And so we're back where we were.
We're back where we were, and the president has put so much stock in getting his friend Xi to solve this problem. He's tweeted about it. He's boasted about that. The Chinese President Xi, and it doesn't work. According to General Keane, the envoy went there, and they started testing again. So I don't know what kind of pressure that the U.S. can put on China to get it to put pressure on North Korea if it doesn't want to.
The UN Security Council meets tomorrow. They're already the biggest biggest sanctioned country in the
they're
world.
The biggest sanctioned country. There is more that the Chinese can do. They can cut off all of those oil shipments that the U.S. wants it to do, and it hasn't done it yet.
Matt.
Yeah, China can do a lot more, and they're, I hate to use an old term, but the axis of evil between these nuclear powers and the border with China is incredibly troubling. I do think it's not widely discussed, but a lot of people believe there's some significant computer hacking going on with these missiles that is causing them to hit the Sea of Japan and not a more menacing target, which I hope is true. But the problem is with even that strategy, it just takes one to get through that system, that defense, and we were in a whole new world of chaos. And I don't blame Donald Trump for this. You can say his diplomatic approach has not worked yet, but he inherited a 20-year problem, which was to kick the can down the road. And now he's faced, this is really the biggest challenge of the Trump presidency. He is faced with terrible options, and he's got to do something that takes away this nuclear menace from reaching our allies and maybe even our own shores.
Yeah, and we were just there in the DMZ, and really it's seconds if the U.S. military launches that the artillery from North Korea would hit Seoul, and the shelters there. You just wonder how that would all happen if there's a military action. I want to talk quickly about this other big development here in Washington, and that is the Abu Khatala trial coming to an end. Tom, 3 out of 18 charges found guilty, but not for murder, for the Benghazi attack that left 4 Americans, including the U.S. ambassador in Libya, dead in 2012.
Right, and I think here you see in the clearest possible sense the repudiation, quite frankly, in my point of view, about the Obama narrative of counterterrorism, in the sense that you bring people into civilian courts and allow them to use federal criminal procedure to their own benefits, rather than employing, as President George W. Bush endorsed and President Trump, we believe, endorses, the military tribunal system. And again, I think there is a real palpable sense of anger on a lot of different